I'm Brendan Coogan, freelance reporter with a particular passion for motoring and electric vehicle technology. This is EV TV. Hello and welcome to EV TV, the series that tells you everything you need to know about electric vehicles and battery technology. The future is all about sustainable sources of energy. So wind, solar, wave, all contribute to cleaner, greener energy generation. So it's quite appropriate that we've come down to this wonderful community managed solar farm situated here in the south of the UK. Now, electric vehicles, or EVs as we've come to know them, are projected to account for 55% of all new vehicle sales by the year 2040. So it's no exaggeration to say they have revolutionised the motor industry and motorsport.
I'm Adrien Dedieu from DHL, experts in automobility EV logistics. I'm your host, and for my day job, I'm Chief of Staff for the global automobility sector at DHL CSI. Whether you work in a vehicle or battery manufacturing, manage a car dealership, or any business involved with the future of electric vehicles, this series is made for you. We are looking at the entire value chain that's crucial to making the EV revolution happen, from storage to safety. We're inviting experts from many different backgrounds around the world to share their enthusiasm and knowledge of EV technology with us.
Here's a quick taster of some of the exciting things you'll be able to see coming up in the next few episodes.
So, let's get straight onto today's main topic, the impact of hybrids and electric vehicles on our environment. Electric vehicles had an all-time global sales high of an estimated 3.1 million vehicles in 2020. People bought for different reasons, but a major one is EV's contribution to a healthier environment. We also need to think about the CO2 that's being produced when a car battery is being manufactured. Most EV batteries are currently manufactured in China, South Korea, or Japan. And in these countries, the use of carbon in electricity production is relatively high. But that's changing, and there's a shift to more localized manufacturing, and CO2 levels are set to improve in the future with the increased use of renewable energy. In China, the proportion of renewable energy in the electricity mix is set to rise sharply between now and 2025. Improved energy production and advanced battery technology ensures electric cars will make even less of an environmental impact. It is worth remembering that once an electric vehicle hits the road, most of its emissions have already been produced. On the other hand, for internal combustion engine, when the car hits the road, a long period of tailpipe emission production has just begun. For many people, the bridge to the electric vehicle is a plug-in hybrid. Sales here are being driven by a combination of increased environmental awareness and costs, whether that's running costs, vehicle taxation, or congestion charging. Many cities have started to switch from polluting vehicles like diesel buses to hybrids in order to become a bit more environmentally responsible. There has been widespread anxiety about the range of battery electric vehicles. But times are changing. It is projected that globally, approximately 26% of new vehicle sales in 2030 will be battery-powered electric vehicles, while plug-in hybrids will have a fair market share of about 6%.
Now, Here's a question for you. Will the electricity power grid be able to cope with the enormous demand that's placed on it? Smart charging means that EV owners should benefit from lower costs if they charge their vehicle when there's a surplus available in the grid. That means at night when we're all asleep. Now we're going to look at a couple of areas in more depth. First, Adrienne looked at the environmental impacts of battery production. But I want to know what happens when a battery comes to the end of its life. How do you go about recycling them? Well, I've come inside to the studio to call up Celine Clausel, Director at Element Energy. She's led authoritative studies on battery production and development, and more crucially, how to recycle them. Celine, bonjour, welcome to EV TV. EVs are making such strong claims about the environment. Tell me, what should happen when a battery reaches the end of its life? And crucially, what are the regulations?
Right, very good questions. Thanks for inviting me. So it's a very fragmented answer, right? I'm going to give you a little bit of a world tour, starting with the best in class. In China, they've introduced law as early as 2018, whereby the automotive manufacturers had to take charge and has to set up the recycling process already. Next, I will put the European Union. At the moment, we have a battery directive, which is not perfect. It has only 50% by weight recycling on lithium-ion, but they've just drafted a new version, which is going to bring really good targets, 100% collection, recovery rates on lithium, cobalt, and nickel, for instance. It will take a few years to go through the process, but by 2023, we should have it. Next, we look at the US. It's a very fragmented picture. At federal level, there's nothing specific about lithium-ion recycling, but several states have rules. Some are a bit like the European Unions with a producer responsibility, but on the battery producers, and others is more on the consumer who has to recycle. And I'll say the last bit on my world tour will be Australia, where they're a little bit more behind. They still have to put the frameworks in place, but they're working on it. So quite a fragmented picture when it comes to recycling.
So it sounds like there is no across-the-board standards. Do you think that would help?
Yeah, standards help, but if it takes 10 years to agree a world standard, by no means start in each country to do something, I would say.
Okay. How much of EV batteries can be recycled?
Okay, so I'll answer two questions, actually. I'll answer how much can be recycled and how much is recycled. It's a bit
Very
different.
good.
Technically, you can recycle more than 90% of the content of a battery. And there are different processes, and I won't bore you with them. But in practice, because the regulations are not imposing 90% plus recycling, people don't do that because it's not economically viable. So at the moment, it's not recycled at 90% plus.
Do you think that picture will improve?
Yes, as I said, the regulations are getting more toothy. And when we model actually the economic case of recycling, it's getting really, really good once you can fill up the recycling facility, which at the moment, there's not that many batteries coming out of cars because they will last a long time actually. So.
Well, we'll get on to that in a minute. I've heard this phrase used for EV batteries, second life. What is it, and can I get one?
You cannot get a second life. Mind you, maybe your retirement is your second life. So second life is the fancy way of saying reusing. So the first life is using in a car where high performance is expected. At the end of the life of the car, or maybe a little bit before, maybe after 10 years or so, the driving range might not be good enough, or the acceleration at low state of charge might not be good enough anymore for the driver, and they might want to swap their battery. But the battery is still good for other applications. Battery in your home, in an industrial setting where you put a large system to help us back up and help to stabilize the grid. So there's a lot of need for that in the future. So that's what we call second life, being using the battery elsewhere, which is really important because you want to use the battery as long as you can before you send it to recycling.
So that's an environmental measure that will be good for homes. I mean, I think there'll be thousands of EV batteries taken out of vehicles, but that will give us a great big bank of batteries for capacity for use elsewhere.
That's right. Actually, it's more like millions than thousands.
Right.
So we've done a little bit of calculation again. So looking at 2040, and if I just pick one country, the UK, considering that we're going to have more and more renewable power, wind and solar, for instance, which requires storage because they don't just produce when you want. Even if we do smart charging with EVs, the system will still need about 15 gigawatt hour of storage to operate in the most economically interesting way. The second life batteries coming out of cars could amount to 12 gigawatt hour by that stage. So the second life batteries could really help on that system where we want more renewable energy. So it's an exciting development.
We've talked about recycling and how they might be repurposed. What about the beginning of the process, the raw materials used to make batteries? How much damage are we doing when we mine these materials?
Yeah. So first of all, you're right to point this out. Anything that is mined has an impact. Right? When it comes to batteries, the material that worries people most is cobalt for a variety of reasons, including the fact that the production or the reserves are very concentrated on a few countries, but mostly because of their environmental impact as well as human impact. So what are we doing about that? Well, first of all, the issues are really well localized, so there's work ongoing. And I would say there's two branches of activities. There is a fact that automotive manufacturers, even if they don't produce a cell, they start to establish supply contracts all the way to the raw material to secure the supply, but also to have a better audit, a better checks that it's done in a way that is the most sustainable way possible. Secondly, the other way around these issues is trying to use less and less cobalt, and all manufacturers are looking at using less cobalt in their batteries.
So in terms of the future, what do you think are the raw materials that might be used?
Well, there's two broad things. So there's a kind of cobalt-free battery that already exists, lithium iron phosphate batteries, for instance, if we stay in the lithium family. The trade-off here is that the energy density is not as good, so it's cheaper, but you won't have as much energy in your car for the same size. And the other branch is that people are trying to get rid of cobalt. So they're playing with the share of nickel, manganese, aluminium to have less and less cobalt. Some claim they managed to do a nickel manganese battery without cobalt at all. And then there's completely different families like lithium air, but these are very much at the lab. They're not really ready for cars, if ever.
Okay, thanks very much, Celine. I'm sure we'll see you again very soon. Now, think that all this technology is brand new? Think again. Now, we've covered the end of the EV battery's life and indeed its start, but there's another aspect we touched on earlier, the hybrid. For many, it's the bridge to a full EV. Hybrids come in many forms, from the range extended EV, is that a hybrid, to the mild hybrid, and of course, the plug-in. When you charge an EV or a plug-in hybrid, the source of the electricity really matters. At one extreme, it might come from a coal-fired power station, not good. Or wind turbines, very good. CO2 emission savings are much higher for electric cars used in countries where the power generation is dominated by low carbon sources. However, in countries where power generation is from mainly coal, some hybrid vehicles may have lower emissions than EVs. The good news is that many countries are now switching to renewables. Did you know that Oslo has more electric vehicles per inhabitant than any city in the world? Norway is the world's 15th largest oil producer. It's also the only country in the world where a 100% electric car was the best-selling new passenger car in 2018. The first time in any country that an all-electric car topped the annual sales in the passenger car segment. In 2014, Norway was also the first country where 1 in every 100 passenger cars on the road was a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. The Norwegian plug-in car segment market share has been the highest in the world for several years, almost 60% in 2019. Their fleet of electric cars is one of the cleanest anywhere in the world. That's because about 98% of the electricity generated in the country comes from renewables, mainly hydropower. Now that's a glimpse of the future. And on that subject, here's some news.
According to a new European study, electric cars use much less raw materials than internal combustion vehicles. The study compared the amount of materials that can't be recycled or otherwise recovered. For an electric car, that's a relatively small amount of metal used in the battery pack. For a gasoline or diesel car, that's thousands of barrels of oil consumed over a vehicle's lifetime. And in Europe, over a fifth of metals needed to make a new battery could come from recycling by 2035.
Everything we've looked at so far depends on something we haven't talked about yet. But without it, there would be no electric vehicle sector. I'm talking about logistics, the transportation of batteries across their life cycle, from raw materials right through the end-of-life recycling and safe disposal. And to help us look at the future of logistics, I'm joined by Toby Groom, EV logistics and battery specialist from DHL.
Hey Adrian.
Toby, my first question is this. If DHL is endorsing electric vehicles and hybrids, shouldn't it be using them itself?
We do. And to think big in terms of sustainability, we intend to reduce all logistics-related emissions to zero by 2050. We're going to reduce local air pollution emissions with clean pickup and delivery solutions, especially electric vehicles.
So good to hear that DHL is actually practicing what it preaches. So let's talk about the future. Electric vehicle development expectations are being exceeded year on year. That means that the anticipated timeline to adoption is highly likely to be shorter than expected, right? So what does that mean for the EV battery industry?
In practical terms, the EV supply chain has less time than it was originally thought, So the logistics industry has to supercharge efforts to ensure it's capable of meeting the entire industry needs. Even if we look at research from 2020 by Deloitte, there'll be a tipping point for battery electric vehicles on a par with ICE internal combustion engine vehicles by 2022.
What does it mean then for those logistics companies that will have to carry those batteries through supply chains?
Well, based on that volume growth predicted, we have to simplify the EV logistics processes. Supply chains have to be designed with flexibility and agility in the train to ensure, uninterrupted supply. Economies can't cope with electric vehicles being off the road purely because they can't get replacement batteries. Naturally, it will always be to create a robust supply chain with resilience built in. But it has to now have design based on modular solutions that serve the demand, for batteries and materials. Now, DHL are addressing this with optimized, compliant and sustainable supply chains, but this is only one part of the bigger solution. What we need is a more integrated approach, starting with production, ending with reclamation and recycling programs. Damaged defective batteries, second end of life, that adds additional complexity. But the EV supply chain isn't just limited to battery management. Charging infrastructure is going to be critical, as well as the supply of semiconductors, and major implications relate to both.
Well, Toby, thank you very much. That gave us a very good insight into the logistics challenges brought by electrification.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Pleasure to be here.
I hope you found our exploration of the environmental impact of electric vehicles interesting. We've uncovered some fascinating facts. Electric vehicles had an all-time global sales high of 3.1 million vehicles in 2020, and they are projected to have a 55% market share of new car sales by 2040.
Smart charging means that EV owners can be assured that their power requirements will be met with a surplus of electricity available. Processing centres can already extract up to 98% of materials that are used in the modern car batteries for recycling and reuse. And the issue of an over-reliance on cobalt and lithium is also being addressed there's a new formula of cobalt, nickel, manganese and aluminium batteries coming on stream. There are even cobalt-free batteries.
Over 1 year, just one electric vehicle can save a huge amount of CO2. We've been to Norway, where the fleet of electric vehicles is one of the cleanest in the world. And that's because about 98% of the electricity generated in the country comes from renewables, and mainly hydropower. But what, I hear you ask, is in the next episode? Well, if you ever worried about the practical distance of today's electric cars before it needs recharging, or about replacing the batteries at great expense, well, the answer is, we'll let you know.
The good news is that battery technology is progressing at an amazing pace. To keep up, you'll need to watch the next episode, which will be available on all the usual channels very soon. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again.